Long before the rise of kings and the birth of noble houses, Westeros was a wild and untouched world, a land ruled not by men, but by magic. Towering forests stretched endlessly across the continent, their canopies so thick they swallowed sunlight. Rivers carved ancient paths through mountains that had never known a human footprint. In this untouched wilderness lived the first true inhabitants of the land, the children of the forest. They were small, elusive beings, no taller than a child, with skin like tree bark and eyes that shimmered like pools of deep green water. To call them primitive would be a mistake. They were deeply attuned to the natural world, speaking in whispers to the animals, listening to the wind, and wielding powers that defied comprehension. They did not build cities or raise monuments. Their temples were the heart trees, ancient weirwoods with pale white bark and leaves as red as blood, their faces carved long ago and their sap said to be the tears of the old gods. For thousands of years they lived in harmony with the land, practicing their rituals and living in balance. But that balance would not last. Around 12,000 years ago, a new force appeared on the eastern horizon. Across the narrow sea, from the vast lands of Essos, came the first men. They arrived not as explorers or emissaries, but as conquerors. They brought with them bronze swords, axes, and armor. They also brought fire. The landing of the first men was the beginning of an age of conflict. As they poured into Westeros, they began clearing forests to build settlements and carve farmland from the wilds. Where the children saw sacred ground, the first men saw opportunity. With each tree that fell and each village that rose, the ancient world of the children began to disappear. The children did not stand idly by. They fought back fiercely, using their knowledge of the land to craft devastating magic. It is said they could cause trees to move, rocks to crumble, and beasts of the earth to rise in their defense. They summoned storms, opened the ground beneath their enemies' feet, and used the elements themselves as weapons. But they were few, and the first men were many. Each year brought more settlers. Each battle lost more ground, and slowly, inevitably, the wild beauty of Westeros was reshaped by iron and fire. Still, it was not merely a war of weapons, it was a war of ideas, of ways of life. The first men brought with them new languages, new customs, and a determination to tame the land. But over time, some began to listen. They saw the power of the children, the mystery in the old ways. They began to worship the old gods, kneeling at the heart trees and feeling the pulse of something ancient and enduring. Eventually, after generations of bloodshed, both sides could fight no longer. What followed was not a surrender, but a compromise. On the Isle of Faces, at the heart of a sacred lake, a pact was forged. The first men and the children of the forest agreed to end their war. The forests would be left to the children, sacred and untouched. The lands already claimed would remain with the first men. Peace, fragile and hard-won, settled over the land. Time passed. Cultures blended. The worship of the old gods spread, particularly in the north. The language of the first men evolved, but echoes of the children's whispers remained in ancient tales. Together, they shaped a new identity, one built not only on conquest, but on memory, tradition, and magic. Yet even as the blood dried and the trees began to grow once more, something darker loomed. Around 8,000 years before the present day, the world was plunged into a terror that would be remembered only in whispers and winter tales, the Long Night. No one alive remembers the moment it began, and no record remains of why. But one winter came that did not end. The sun disappeared from the sky and the land grew colder with each passing day. It was a time of darkness, not just of the sky, but of the soul. For a generation, Westeros knew only cold, hunger, and death. From the farthest reaches of the north came an enemy no one had expected. Tall and silent, with skin like ice and eyes that burned blue, they were called the Others by those who survived. Today, we call them the White Walkers. They moved like shadows across the snow, bringing death with every step. Their weapons were blades of ice, their touch could kill, and those they slew did not remain dead for long. The corpses of fallen men rose again as whites, twisted echoes of the living, serving their icy masters in an army that grew with every battle. They did not seek land, they did not seek wealth, they sought annihilation, to erase life from Westeros. It was a darkness beyond anything the first men or the children had ever faced. But in that darkness, alliances were forged anew. The old enemies fought side by side against a force that threatened them both. And though legends blur fact and fiction, it is said that heroes rose, among them a figure known only as the last hero, who sought out the children and begged for their aid. Together, using powerful magics and ancient weapons, they turned the tide. The others were pushed back, retreating into the icy wilderness from whence they came. And to keep them at bay, the first men built a wall of stone and ice and magic, a barrier so vast it could be seen from the heavens. A night's watch was formed to guard it, swearing eternal vigilance. Peace returned, the land warmed, generations passed, and slowly the long night faded into myth. But myths have power, and what is forgotten does not cease to be. The arrival of the first men had forever changed Westeros. Their blood ran in the veins of kings and commoners alike. Their beliefs shaped the north, their alliances with the children left echoes in the stones and trees, but so too did their war awaken an ancient force, one that slumbers still, watching from the shadows of the far north, waiting. The phrase, "winter is coming," echoed across the halls of House Stark like a prayer, a warning, and a curse. It wasn't just a motto, nor merely a poetic nod to the turning of seasons. It was a legacy, a truth. A weight passed from one Stark to the next through the centuries, each lord and lady whispering it with the gravity of remembered terror. For in the ancient, frost-bitten corners of Westeros, this phrase held the memory of something far worse than snow or frostbite. It spoke of a darkness that once nearly devoured the world. Long ago, before the tales of dragons and iron thrones, before the nobility of Westeros rose and fell in endless cycles, a cold so vast and unnatural descended upon the land, a winter beyond imagining, beyond survival. At the heart of that long night were beings who thrived in the cold, who were the cold, the White Walkers. Silent, relentless, and otherworldly, they moved like shadows across the snow, leaving only death in their wake. Men who had come to Westeros to conquer, to build, to tame the wild lands, now found themselves hopeless before this enemy. Their weapons shattered, their courage faltered. They faced extinction. And yet, just when the world teetered on the edge, something remarkable happened. The first men, hardened warriors with blood-soaked histories, did the unthinkable. They sought peace. Not with the White Walkers, but with their former enemies, the children of the forest. Ancient, mystical beings of the woods, the children were deeply connected to the land in ways men never understood. They were guardians of secrets, wielders of strange and powerful magic. And in their wisdom, they offered not just truce, but alliance. Together, they discovered the one substance that could wound the White Walkers: dragonglass. Obsidian, formed in the fiery bowels of the earth, gleamed like frozen smoke and carried with it an ancient magic the walkers could not withstand. Blades of dragonglass turned the tide. The first men and the children fought side by side, their combined strength and ancient spells pushing the walkers back into the shadows. But strength alone was not enough. Heroes rose from the chaos, figures draped in legend, names whispered in awe long after the fires of battle cooled. Chief among them was a warrior whose story was told differently in every land, but whose name echoed with eerie consistency: Azor Ahai. A figure of myth more than man, he was said to have forged a sword of fire, Lightbringer, and to have driven it through the heart of darkness. His tale, cloaked in fire and sacrifice, would live on across cultures, reshaped with each retelling, but always retaining the same essence: hope, born in fire, against an endless night. Alongside such legends, a brotherhood was forged: the Night's Watch. Men who gave up names, lands, titles, and legacies to take a sacred oath to guard the realms of men against what lurked beyond. They built no castles in the south, claimed no wives, fathered no children. Their loyalty was to the wall and to the darkness that loomed just past it. Through snow and stillness, they kept watch. The war was won, or so it seemed. The White Walkers were driven deep into the frozen north, vanishing into myth and silence. The long night ended, but the memory of it lingered like a scar etched into the soul of the continent. The phrase, "winter is coming," endured not just as a warning of snowstorms, but of that ancient evil that had once nearly swallowed the world. Generations passed, kingdoms rose and fell, songs replaced stories, myths softened the sharp edges of truth, but beneath the surface of Westeros, a truth remained. The White Walkers were never truly defeated. They had not been destroyed, only delayed, waiting, watching. patient as ice. And so the people of Westeros, led by those who remembered, turned their eyes northward. They began a new labor, one not of conquest but of survival. With the children of the forest and the strength of the first men, they constructed something that defied belief. The wall. Stretching for hundreds of miles across the northern edge of Westeros, it soared more than 700 feet into the sky, a glacial monolith of ice and stone. But the wall was more than engineering. It was magic. Ancient, potent spells were woven into its very foundation, laced through each block of ice and every whisper of wind that blew over it. Spells as old as the land itself, designed not just to repel men, but to stop something far worse. It was not merely a wall. It was a seal, a gatekeeper, a last line of defense between the realms of men and the darkness beyond. At the heart of this monumental achievement was a figure cloaked in equal parts history and legend. Bran the Builder, said to be the founder of House Stark and the architect behind both Winterfell and the Wall. Bran's name became synonymous with creation and endurance. Some say he was taught magic by the children. Others claim he built with the help of giants, using their colossal strength to raise the impossible. All agree that it was his vision and perhaps his sorcery that made the Wall what it became. A wall infused with spells, a wall born of unity, a wall forged in desperation yet built to last the ages. And still, despite its towering strength, despite the Night's Watch and the stories passed through generations, the greatest weapon against the White Walkers may have always been remembrance. To forget was to invite doom. To doubt was to crack the wall from within. So the phrase endured, a whisper on cold winds, a warning passed from father to son, mother to daughter, lord to bannerman, Stark to Stark. Winter is coming. Not just a change in season, but a reckoning. And yet, alongside the rise of the Wall came the forging of a brotherhood unlike any other in the history of Westeros. They were known as the Night's Watch, a solemn order of men draped in black, sworn not to a crown or kingdom, but to a duty far older and more daunting, to guard the realms of men from the terrors that dwelled beyond the Wall. These men were not celebrated knights or pampered lords. Many were outcasts, criminals, bastards, or those who had lost everything. But once they took the oath, they became brothers, united. A living shield stretched thin across the edge of the known world. Clinging to a life of hardship in the cold, desolate expanse of the north, the Night's Watch knew neither glory nor comfort. Their lives were marked by isolation, spent watching the horizon for signs of ancient forgotten enemies. While the lords and ladies of the South feasted in warm halls and plotted for power, the men of the Watch stood silent vigil, their breath freezing in the wind, their hands calloused by sword and frost alike. They were rarely remembered, and yet, in their sacrifice, they became legends. The Wall, stretching for hundreds of miles and towering like a mountain of ice, was more than a defensive barrier. It was a symbol of endurance, of resilience, of the unrelenting vigilance required to hold back the dark. It separated not just land, but the known from the unknown, the warmth of civilization from the chilling threat of oblivion. For generations, it stood unbroken, its stones bound by ancient magic, its purpose clear even as the world around it forgot. The realm below might have dismissed the whispers of White Walkers as old tales meant to frighten children, but the Wall remembered. It always remembered. And when the long night threatened once more, when the winds turned bitter and strange figures began to stir in the far north, it was the Night's Watch that stood first, perhaps alone. Their watch, it was said, would not end until death itself claimed them. And even then, the memory of their vow echoed in the frozen stones. But while the north was bound in ice and steel, the south was gripped by a different kind of power, one not born of magic or ancient creatures, but of faith. As the Great Wall watched the northern wilds, another force began shaping the soul of Westeros from within. It did not rise from the ground, but descended from across the sea, carried not on dragons' wings or iron fleets, but in the hearts and words of men. The faith of the Seven began far from the shores of Westeros, in the lands once ruled by the Andals. According to legend, it started with a vision. King Hugor of the Hill, one of the greatest leaders of the Andals, saw 7 divine figures appear before him. These gods, each a facet of life and death, revealed themselves not as separate beings, but as one essence reflected in 7 forms: the father, the mother, the maiden, the crone, the warrior, the smith, and the stranger. In that revelation, a new belief was born, one that promised unity, order, and divine purpose. When the Andals crossed the narrow sea, they brought this faith with them, wielding it like a torch in one hand and a sword in the other. Their arrival was not merely an invasion of land, but a crusade of belief. As they conquered the southern kingdoms, they converted the first men to their faith, replacing the ancient forest gods with the structured theology of the 7. Stone by stone, septs were built. Word by word, the old ways were replaced. The influence of the faith grew quickly. It reshaped not only worship, but the very fabric of society. With the Andals came laws, customs, and a structured religious hierarchy that would entangle itself with the politics of Westeros for centuries to come. The faith became more than spiritual, it became political. At its center stood the High Septon, the chosen voice of the gods on earth. To be crowned king without the blessing of the High Septon was to invite doubt, if not outright rebellion. Over time, the faith's leaders held sway that rivaled the Iron Throne itself. To enforce its will, the faith established the Faith Militant, a martial order that blended religious devotion with armed might. These were not knights in pursuit of honor, but holy warriors sworn to protect the faith's tenets. When kings disobeyed or strayed from doctrine, it was often the Faith Militant that moved to correct them, with prayer or steel. But for all its political might, the faith of the 7 also spoke deeply to the common folk. Each aspect of the 7 reflected a part of their daily lives. The father embodied judgment and law. The mother offered compassion and nurture. The maiden stood for innocence and hope. The crone, with her lantern of wisdom, guided souls through life's uncertain path. The warrior was strength and protection. The smith, the patron of labor, represented industry and craft. And then there was the stranger, the unknowable, feared, and revered figure who embodied death and all that lay beyond understanding. These gods were present in every stage of life. Births were blessed in the name of the mother, warriors prayed to the warrior before battle, deaths were mourned in the shadow of the stranger. Ceremonies and rituals wove the faith into every corner of life in the South, embedding it not just in temples, but in minds and traditions. Yet the faith never claimed all of Westeros. In the north, the old gods still held sway. Beneath the boughs of ancient weirwood trees, where carved faces watched in solemn silence, the people of the north held to their ancient beliefs. Their gods had no names, and spoke not through septons, but through rustling leaves and quiet snow. The divide between these faiths, between the 7 and the old gods, became a fracture that echoed through time. Not just spiritual, but cultural, political, and deeply personal. And so, while kings were crowned and empires rose and fell, 2 great institutions endured, the wall in the north and the faith in the south. Each, in its own way, was a foundation of Westeros. One defended against what lay beyond, the other shaped what lay within. But both over time would become more than symbols. They would become battlegrounds. For while the faith spoke of unity and peace, its history was written in conflict. Religious revolts, clashes with kings, and internal schisms tested its strength. And while the wall had long stood as a line against death, it too would face its greatest trials, not from outside, but from within. By the year 3000 before conquest, the wall still rose tall in the north, its foundations sealed with magic, its shadow cast long over the frozen wastes. But even such might could not hold back every storm. The darkness beyond stirred once more. And this time, it would not be stopped by ice and stone alone. The icy winds howled across the northern reaches of Westeros, where the wall stood tall and unyielding, a monument of ice separating 2 very different worlds. To the people of the South, it was a line of defense, a final frontier against the wild and the unknown. But to those who lived beyond its towering shadow, the free folk, it was something else entirely. Not a shield, but a shackle, a symbol of division. A man-made scar across the land that separated them from their southern kin and marked them as outsiders. The free folk, often called wildlings by those who never dared to understand them, lived beyond the reach of kings, queens, and lords. Their world was one of frozen forests, treacherous mountains, and harsh winters that tested the limits of human endurance. Yet, in that unforgiving wilderness, they forged a life of freedom. They bowed to no crown. They did not kneel. Their communities, scattered like snowflakes across the landscape, were led by those chosen for their strength, cunning, or wisdom, not by birthright or bloodline. To them, titles like Lord or Lady were not badges of honor, but chains designed to bind the human spirit. It was a life that defied the norms of Westerosi society, and that defiance often led to bloodshed. In a time long forgotten by most, around 3,000 years before the current age, a pivotal moment unfolded. A group of free folk, driven by desperation and the punishing cold of the long winter, made a bold move. Under cover of darkness and snow, they crossed the wall, not by force, but by cunning. It was not merely a raid, it was an invasion, one born of need, not greed. They sought land to till, food to eat, warmth for their children, but their path led them south into a realm that did not welcome strangers. There, the ancient House Stark, wardens of the north and eternal guardians of the wall, rose to meet the threat. The head of House Stark, a figure shrouded in both legend and grim responsibility, rallied the northern bannermen, and under banners dusted with frost, they marched to war. The clash was brutal. Steel rang out in the snow-draped forests, and the cries of the wounded echoed beneath the trees. The free folk, fierce and determined, fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. But the North was prepared. Hardened by centuries of vigilance, the northern armies pushed back the invaders, driving them once more beyond the wall and into the icy wilderness. Yet the battle was more than a simple military conflict. It was a message, a warning. Proof that the wall, no matter how tall, could be breached, and that the people on either side of it were destined to collide again and again. In the minds of the Southerners, the wildlings remained savages, lawless marauders who pillaged when times were hard. But the truth was far more complex. The free folk had their own laws, their own legends passed down beside roaring fires, their own gods whispered to in the wind. Their loyalty was not to thrones, but to each other. They viewed the Night's Watch not as noble protectors, but as enforcers of a boundary they had never agreed to, a line drawn by those who had never lived a day in the snow. And so a strange, reluctant understanding formed, neither friendship nor enmity, a tense coexistence dictated by circumstance rather than choice. Over time, the struggle between freedom and feudal order continued, repeating itself like the turning of seasons. Centuries later, that very spirit of rebellion, the same one that had driven the wildlings to cross the wall so long ago, would be reborn in a man named Mance Rayder. A former brother of the Night's Watch, Mance would forsake his black cloak and take up the mantle of King Beyond the Wall, uniting the fractured clans of the free folk under a single banner. His cause was not conquest, it was survival, the same survival that had driven his ancestors south centuries earlier. And though his story unfolded in a different time, it echoed the past with haunting clarity. But the tale of Westeros was not shaped by the North alone. Far to the south, across the narrow sea, another story began to take root. A story of fire. In the year 14 before the conquest of Westeros, a shadow loomed over the Valyrian freehold. Valyria, the shining jewel of Essos, was a land of unimaginable power, a civilization built on the backs of dragons and bound together by sorcery. Its cities gleamed with strange stone, and its people commanded fire itself. It seemed eternal, unshakable. But in the stillness of night, a girl named Daenerys Targaryen dreamed of its end. She saw fire and ruin, mountains exploding, ash choking the sky, dragons wailing in terror. Valyria, the unassailable empire of flame, was to fall. Her father, Lord Aegon Targaryen, believed her, and that belief changed the fate of the world. He did the unthinkable. He abandoned Valyria. With his family, his household, and 5 dragons, Lord Aegon sailed west across the sea and settled on the smoldering volcanic island known as Dragonstone. It was a lonely, brooding place perched on the edge of Westeros, distant from the halls of power and the echo of empires, but it was safe. 12 years later, Daenerys' vision came true. The doom of Valyria swept across the land in a cataclysm of fire and death. Entire cities vanished in an instant. Mountains split apart. The sky turned to smoke. Valyria, the greatest empire the world had ever known, was gone. In its place were ruins and ash, silence and sorrow. But the Targaryens survived. From that moment forward, their bloodline bore not only the legacy of dragon riders, but the burden of prophecy. They were a family marked by fate, by dreams, by fire. And though they were but a minor house among the Dragon Lords, they would one day rise to dominate Westeros itself. The decision to flee, once seen as cowardice, became a testament to foresight and strength. Dragonstone would become their stronghold, a volcanic cradle for the fire that would one day set the continent ablaze. The Targaryens did not conquer Westeros by accident. Their roots were forged in fire, their future written in flame. And as ice and fire continued to shape the world, the stories of the Free Folk and the Dragon Lords marched onward, separate yet destined to collide in ways neither could have foreseen. It was a choice born not only of instinct, but of foresight. A decision made quietly, almost in the shadows, yet destined to alter the course of history. The Targaryens, one of many Valyrian families blessed and burdened with dragons, turned their backs on the towering spires of Valyria and sailed west. What appeared at the time to be an exile, or perhaps even a retreat, would later be understood as the single most important decision in their family's long and storied lineage. And it came just in time. Only 12 years later, the world as they knew it ended. The doom of Valyria, a cataclysmic eruption of fire and death, shattered the empire in a storm of molten fury. The ground split open. The skies rained fire, earthquakes broke the land, and volcanoes tore through the heart of the Valyrian peninsula. Entire cities vanished beneath ash, mountains melted, oceans boiled. The mighty civilization that had once tamed dragons and spanned continents was brought low, reduced to blackened ruins and haunted coasts. In a matter of hours, it was gone. Of all the noble Valyrian houses, only one survived. The Targaryens. They had fled not to escape a known danger, but because of a dream, one born from the mind of Daenys the Dreamer. She had seen it all before it happened. Her warnings were heeded, and so her family left behind their ancestral homeland, crossing the narrow sea to settle on a rocky, storm-battered island known as Dragonstone. Dragonstone was no paradise. Isolated and wind-scoured, it jutted from the sea like the jagged tooth of some ancient beast. But it bore the marks of fire. Like Valyria, it was shaped by volcanic heat and rich in dragonglass, a mysterious black stone said to hold dark properties. It was not a home chosen for comfort. It was a home chosen for survival. There, the Targaryens waited, not with desperation, but with intent. Though their numbers were few, they held the greatest of all weapons: dragons. Great, winged creatures born of fire and bound to the blood of their riders. These beasts had once filled Valyrian skies, but now only a handful remained, and all of them belonged to House Targaryen. As the years passed and the rest of Westeros quarreled and warred among itself, the Targaryens watched from across the water. They studied the politics of the Seven Kingdoms, learned the weaknesses of their future enemies, and nurtured the power sleeping in the caverns beneath their feet. Dragonstone, once a refuge, became a crucible. The Targaryens were no longer one among many. They were the last of their kind, and they waited. Across the sea, the men of Westeros concerned themselves with crowns and castles. Kings rose and fell, kingdoms formed and fractured, but none of them saw what was coming. None of them understood that the future was not being written in their halls or on their battlefields, but on an island of obsidian stone and roaring winds. There, amid the volcanic smoke and sea spray, a legacy was kindling. The conquest was not far off. Meanwhile, in the heart of the continent, another monument was rising. It began in 42 BC under the reign of King Harrenhal, ruler of the Isles and the rivers. His ambition was as vast as his dominion. He envisioned a fortress unlike any ever built, a monument to his power that would last for generations, a castle so immense, so fortified, that it would outshine all others. He called it Harrenhal. Its towers would reach the clouds. Its walls would be thicker than any battering ram could break. Stone by stone, beam by beam, it rose. The riverlands bent under the strain. Forests were stripped bare for timber. Quarries emptied their depths for stone. Thousands of laborers toiled, bled, and died building it. And as the years dragged on, Harren's descendants carried the torch of his vision. It took 40 years to complete. But castles, no matter how grand, are only as strong as the world around them. As the final stones of Harrenhal were set, a shadow crossed the sky. A new power had awakened, one born not of stone and steel, but of flame and flight. Aegon Targaryen, known to history as Aegon the Conqueror, rose from Dragonstone with 3 dragons at his back. His ambition was no less than the unification of all Westeros under his banner. King Harren had built a fortress to withstand any army, but he had not prepared for dragons. When Aegon's forces marched on Harrenhal, the Old King withdrew behind his colossal walls. He believed them impenetrable. No army had ever taken Harrenhal. No siege had ever breached its walls. But this was no ordinary army, and this was no ordinary war. Balerion the Black Dread, the largest dragon to ever live, descended upon the castle in a storm of black wings and molten breath. Fire swept through Harrenhal, melting stone, collapsing towers, and turning the once impervious fortress into a funeral pyre. King Harren and his sons died screaming inside the very walls they believed would protect them. It had taken 4 decades to build. It took 4 minutes to destroy. And yet, the ruin of Harrenhal did not end with its destruction. In the years that followed, it passed from one noble house to another. Each sought to claim its strength. None succeeded. One by one, they fell to misfortune, madness, or war. The castle, now broken and haunted, seemed cursed. Its halls whispered with the ghosts of ambition. Its towers, scorched and crumbling, stood as a warning carved in stone. Power built on pride alone cannot stand. Back across the sea, the Targaryens understood what Harren did not. Power must be more than a monument. It must be alive. It must be fire and blood and vision. They had all three. And soon, the world would know it. From the black shores of Dragonstone to the scorched stones of Harrenhal, a new age was coming. An age of dragons. And yet every family that ever dared to claim Harrenhal met the same grim fate. As if the castle itself had been cursed from the moment its stone walls first touched fire, Harrenhal decayed not only in stone and timber, but in spirit. It loomed over the riverlands like a shadow, immense and silent, its grandeur reduced to an echo of ruin. What was once a fortress built to defy time became a monument to human folly. Every noble house that took residence within its massive walls eventually crumbled, undone by betrayal, fire, or despair. The legend of Harrenhal's curse began not with whispers, but with fire and blood. Its original master, King Harren the Black, had poured an entire kingdom's wealth and labor into raising it, stone by stone, tower by tower. Built to be unconquerable, Harrenhal was the largest castle ever constructed in Westeros, a mighty stronghold intended to secure Harren's legacy for 1,000 years. But on the very day it was completed, that legacy turned to ash. For it was then that Aegon Targaryen arrived. The Targaryens came not as mere conquerors, but as a force of nature. In the year 2 before conquest, Aegon and his sisters, Visenya and Rhaenys, crossed the narrow sea with a dream of unity and the terrifying power to make it real. The lords of Westeros had long fought one another in a tangled web of feuds and rivalries, each claiming sovereignty, each certain in their might. Aegon did not come to negotiate. He came with dragons. Balerion the Black Dread, whose wings could cast entire towns into darkness, led the way. Alongside him flew Vhagar and Meraxes, ridden by Aegon's sisters, each beast a harbinger of death and fire. Against this skyborn power, no army stood a chance. The conquest began with ruthless precision. Aegon's forces landed on the eastern shores of Westeros, quickly seizing strategic locations and building what would become King's Landing. His dragons were not only weapons, but messengers of a new age. Castles that had stood for centuries fell in hours. Armies disbanded at the mere sight of the dragons overhead. Cities surrendered rather than be reduced to smoldering wreckage. Harrenhal was meant to be different. Its thick walls were supposed to be impervious to siege. Its towers were taller than any in the land. King Harren scoffed at Aegon's approach, refusing to bend the knee. But dragons do not respect stone. As night fell, Balerion descended. The fire that followed turned stone to slag, iron to liquid, and men to ash. Harren and all his sons perished within the walls of their grand fortress. It took decades to build and only minutes to fall. From that moment on, Harrenhal was more than a ruin. It was a scar. Its blackened towers and empty halls told a story that every lord in Westeros would remember. The age of kings warring for dominion was ending. The age of fire had begun. But Aegon's conquest was far from over. To the west, the combined armies of House Gardener of the Reach and House Lannister of the Westerlands gathered their strength. Confident in their numbers, they believed they could crush the Targaryen host before it advanced further. What followed was the Field of Fire, one of the most devastating battles in Westerosi history. The two great armies collided on the open plain, tens of thousands of men clashing in a storm of steel and strategy. But once again, dragons turned the tide. Aegon unleashed Balerion, Vhagar, and Meraxes together, their fire merging into a sea of flame. Thousands burned where they stood. The cries of the dying were drowned out by the roar of dragon fire. When the smoke cleared, the Reach and the Westerlands had been broken. House Gardner was extinguished. The survivors knelt. From there, Aegon's dominance spread like wildfire. The Stormlands fell after the death of Argilac the Arrogant, and the Iron Islands were brought into the fold. Yet it was the North that posed the final question. Torrhen Stark, king in the North, marched south with his bannermen, determined to protect his realm. But when he reached the Trident and beheld the scale of Aegon's power, his armies, his dragons, the ashes of defiance that lay behind him, Torrhen made a fateful decision. Rather than send his men to slaughter, he knelt. In that moment, the ancient kingship of the North ended. But House Stark survived. Their lands, their titles, and their people were preserved. Torrhen's choice was seen by some as cowardice, but to many more it was wisdom. He would be remembered not for battle, but for bending the knee and sparing his people a fiery death. From that day forward, he was known as the King Who Knelt. With 6 of the 7 kingdoms now under Targaryen rule, the map of Westeros was forever redrawn. The Iron Throne was forged from the swords of the fallen, a twisted monument to unity born from conquest. The age of independent kings gave way to a single monarchy, where dragons once ruled the skies and the realm lived in the long, smoky shadow of their wings. And so the legacy of Harrenhal lives on, not in strength, but in silence. Its blackened stone still stands, a testament to the folly of kings who believe their walls can outlast fire. For in the end, it was not just castles that fell, but the very notion that power alone could protect against the winds of fate. Even in death, the dragons refused to be forgotten. And so it was that Aegon Targaryen, the first of his name, had nearly completed the impossible, the conquest of the continent known as Westeros. Kingdom after kingdom had fallen before him, their banners trampled beneath the wings of his great beasts, his armies unmatched, his ambition boundless. Yet one kingdom resisted still. Dorne, nestled in the harsh, sun-blasted south, refused to kneel. It did not fall by sword or flame, it endured. Through stealth, terrain, and guerrilla defiance, the Dornish held fast, slipping through the claws of dragons like sand through fingers. Though they would eventually join the realm through diplomacy and marriage rather than blood and fire, they remained an outlier, a testament to the fact that not all resistance is futile. Still, Aegon's conquest was otherwise total. From the ashes of war rose a city born of triumph, King's Landing, the beating heart of his new kingdom. It was on the very ground where he had triumphed over his enemies that he forged his legacy, not in parchment or stone, but in steel. The Iron Throne, brutal and imposing, was not a symbol of comfort or tradition. It was a throne of terror, forged from the swords of the vanquished, fused together by dragonfire, jagged and sharp. It was designed not for ease, but to remind. Every cut and edge told the tale of what it took to rule, and who had been crushed in the making of that rule. For nearly 300 years, that twisted mass of blackened steel would serve as the seat of Targaryen power. The dynasty reigned supreme not only through political acumen or royal blood, but by the wings and fire of their dragons. These were not mere beasts. They were living embodiments of conquest, gods of the sky whose flames shaped history. From Aegon's first fiery campaign to the empire his descendants expanded and secured, the dragons were more than pets or weapons. They were the foundation of the dynasty's mythos. Their existence alone ensured fear and obedience. But the flame that burns the brightest cannot burn forever. By the time the calendar marked just 3 years after the conquest, 3 AC, the skies grew quiet. The last true dragon exhaled its final breath, a whisper of smoke fading into the annals of time. The era of dragon lords came to a silent, sorrowful end. The cause was not a grand battle or a heroic sacrifice. It was something far more insidious: decline. Slow, steady, and unstoppable. In the years following Aegon's reign, dragons still hatched, flew, and fought. But each new generation brought creatures smaller, weaker, and less majestic than the last. The magic that had once roared in their chests seemed to dwindle. Their fire dimmed. Their wings faltered. The skies of Westeros, once streaked with flame and thunder, became still. The final chapter of their legacy was written during the reign of Aegon III, remembered by history as Aegon the Dragonbane. His name, grim and unflinching, did not stem from acts of violence against the creatures. Rather, he bore the burden of their extinction. Under his rule, the last dragon died, not by his hand but on his watch. No new hatchlings stirred, no eggs cracked, no roars echoed from Dragonstone. Despite every effort to revive their kind, nothing would bring them back. The people whispered that the magic was gone, that the gods had turned their faces. Others blamed Aegon directly, seeing in his reign the embodiment of failure. But history is rarely so simple. The end had begun long before he was crowned, before he drew breath. He simply stood witness to it, the dying breath of an age. The death of the last dragon was not merely a loss of wonder, it was a shift in power. With dragons gone, so too vanished the Targaryens' greatest advantage. Their aura of invincibility cracked. Rebellious lords, once cowed by the threat of incineration, began to scheme more boldly. Where fire had once kept the realm in line, now politics, armies, and treaties were all that remained. The Targaryens were forced to play the same game as every other noble house, and in doing so, they became vulnerable. The dragon was not only a weapon, it was a deterrent, a statement of supremacy. Without it, the Iron Throne grew cold. The weight of rule, once carried on wings, now fell heavily on shoulders, ill-prepared for a world where fear alone could not govern. For Aegon III, the loss defined his rule. Though he succeeded in preserving the lineage, he did so under the shadow of absence. His reign was one of mourning. The skies were silent, the towers of Dragonstone empty. The halls, once warmed by fire, now echoed with stillness. And history would remember him not as a tyrant or a hero, but as a boy king who lived to see a miracle become a memory. But even in extinction, dragons left their mark. Their bones still lay buried beneath ancient rock. Their names whispered through the generations. Their fire, once a force of domination, became legend. And in that legend, they endured. From Daenerys Targaryen's distant dream of reclaiming the throne to Robert Baratheon's uprising against the last of the Dragon Kings, the ghost of Aegon the Conqueror remained. His shadow stretched across centuries, looming over every ruler who dared to sit the Iron Throne. His conquest was not just a tale of power won, it was the cornerstone of a nation. And so the legacy of fire lived on, flickering in memory, waiting to be reborn. And yet, the dragons left an indelible mark on the Targaryen legacy. Though the last of their kind perished in the year 153 after Aegon's conquest, their memory lingered like smoke on the wind, unseen but never forgotten. Their shadows stretched across time, cast long and wide over the annals of Westeros, over every corner of a continent once bound together by fire and fear. Even in extinction, the dragons remained eternal in sigil and symbol. The Targaryens continued to emblazon their banners with the fierce three-headed dragon, its wings outstretched, its mouths open in silent roar. At the center of it all stood the Iron Throne, a brutal sculpture of power forged from the swords of vanquished foes. It was more than a seat, it was a monument, a constant reminder of the price of conquest and the might of House Targaryen. But the idea of dragons, their flame and fury, never died. Whispers of their return stirred quietly through taverns, scrolls, and dreams. Some said their magic had not vanished, but merely slept, waiting for the blood of old Valyria to awaken it once more. That hope, fragile and ancient, would flare to life again centuries later. From exile and ashes rose Daenerys Targaryen, the last known scion of her house, a child of storm and salt, born beneath the howling winds of Dragonstone. Alone, cast off by a world that no longer bent to the will of her ancestors, she accomplished the impossible. She hatched dragons from stone. 3, as if by divine design. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, creatures of legend born again in fire. The skies trembled as they soared across the heavens, breaking a silence that had lasted generations. For the first time in living memory, Westeros looked upward and remembered what it meant to fear the skies. Daenerys was no mere ruler in exile. She was fire reborn. Through her, the Targaryen legacy blazed anew, not as a forgotten tale, but as a living force. The blood of the dragons still flowed hot in her veins, and the world would come to see that the Age of Dragons had not ended. It had only been waiting. Still, to understand the Targaryen downfall is to understand the flames that once roared and the ashes they left behind. For nearly 3 centuries, House Targaryen ruled Westeros. Though their dragons faded into myth, their motto, fire and blood, still echoed in the halls of power. Yet by the time of King Aerys II, the last of the line to sit the Iron Throne, that legacy had become a haunted reflection of its past glory. The Targaryen reign, once mighty and unyielding, now trembled on the edge of madness and collapse. At the center of that collapse stood Aerys himself, the king history would remember only as the Mad King. He had not always been cruel. In his youth, there was potential, promise even. Aerys was charming, charismatic, a ruler who might have restored pride to his house. But as the years passed, that promise withered beneath the weight of fear, suspicion, and a growing obsession with fire. He saw enemies in every shadow. Loyalists became traitors in his eyes. Wildfire became his answer to treachery. What began as whispers of instability soon turned to cries of horror. He burned those who opposed him. He burned those who questioned him. He burned because he could. The madness was not just his own. It had rippled outward, infecting the realm with unease. Still, it was one act, one singular, fateful act that transformed discontent into open rebellion. In the year 282 AC, Aerys' son, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, allegedly abducted Lyanna Stark, the betrothed of Robert Baratheon. What truly happened remains clouded in mystery, but the impact was immediate and devastating. To the Starks, it was a crime of honor. To Robert, it was a personal betrayal. And to the great houses of Westeros, it was the spark that set the dry forest ablaze. Thus began Robert's rebellion, a war that would change the face of Westeros. Robert Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, led the charge. Beside him stood Eddard Stark and Jon Arryn, united not just by loyalty, but by necessity. Aerys' paranoia had turned powerful allies into desperate foes. The realm rose against him, tired of fire and thirsting for change. The decisive moment came at the Battle of the Trident. There, amidst the clash of steel and the roar of men, Robert faced Rhaegar in single combat. Rhaegar wore black armor inlaid with rubies, gleaming like blood in the sun. When Robert's warhammer struck him down, the river itself bore witness, its waters stained red, the rubies scattered like fallen stars. With Rhaegar dead, the Targaryen cause crumbled. Yet the final act of their downfall took place not on the battlefield, but behind the walls of King's Landing. As the capital fell, the Mad King gave one last, desperate order: burn them all. Wildfire had been hidden throughout the city, ready to turn it into a blazing tomb. But it never came to pass. Sir Jaime Lannister, a member of the Kingsguard sworn to protect Aerys, betrayed him. He struck the king down before the fire could be unleashed. What some called treason, Jaime called salvation. With Aerys dead, Robert Baratheon took the throne. The Targaryen dynasty was over. Those who survived, Viserys and the infant Daenerys, fled across the sea. The once great house that had united a continent with dragons now scattered like ashes on the wind. And yet, the story did not end there. It never does. The blood of the dragon remained. In hidden places, it still burned, quiet, patient, waiting for the day it would rise again. The realm may have turned its gaze toward a new age, but beneath it all, the ancient fire smoldered. To truly understand the fall, we must also remember the rise. Long before Robert's hammer fell, there was Aegon the Conqueror. Aegon did what no one before him had done. He united 6 of the 7 kingdoms under one crown. He did it not with diplomacy or inheritance, but with dragons. Fire made him king, and blood kept him there. But one land resisted. Dorne, the sun-scorched kingdom of the south, stood defiant. Its deserts and mountains became a fortress no dragon could tame. Aegon's armies marched, his sisters flew, but the Dornish did not kneel. They fought, they vanished, they endured, and though peace would one day come, it was not through fire. It was through marriage, through patience, through cunning. At the heart of that resistance lies one of the great unsolved mysteries of Westeros, how a land without dragons stood against the conqueror who wielded them. In the end, the story of House Targaryen is not one of rise and fall. It is one of fire, unpredictable, destructive, and unyielding. It burns bright, it consumes, but sometimes, even from ashes, it rises again. In the smoldering wake of conquest, after the black wings of Aegon the Conqueror's dragons had turned armies to ash and cities into ruins, there remained one land that refused to kneel: Dorne. The rest of Westeros had bent under the weight of fire and blood, its great houses subdued, its kings dethroned. But Dorne, rugged, sun-scorched, and fiercely proud, stood alone, unbroken. Led by House Martell, the Dornish response to invasion was unlike anything Aegon had faced. They didn't meet his legions on open fields. They didn't challenge his dragons with armies of steel and banners. Instead, they vanished into their deserts, into their mountains, into shadows. They became phantoms, striking with cunning, vanishing with the wind. It wasn't war in the traditional sense. It was survival in the sands, and the Dornish played the game with ruthless precision. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, traps, assassinations, these were their weapons. They lured Aegon's forces into narrow canyons and sun-beaten wastes, where the elements became their ally. Soldiers grew weak beneath the unrelenting sun. Supplies vanished. Morale eroded like rock beneath wind. The Dragon Lords had conquered kingdoms, but now found themselves swallowed by a landscape that could not be burned into submission. Then came the unthinkable. Meraxes, one of the mighty dragons of House Targaryen, was brought down by a bolt loosed with deadly precision. The beast fell with a thunderous crash, and with it perished Rhaenys Targaryen, Aegon's beloved sister and queen, was never recovered. Her death was a wound that fire could not heal. Still, even with such a blow, Dorne could not be fully broken, and Aegon could not be fully repelled. For years, the conflict festered, unresolved, bitter, and costly to both sides. And then, without warning, the fires of war were extinguished by an act no one had anticipated. Peace. But not a peace born from exhaustion, nor from some triumphant last battle. It came quietly. No horns were blown, no banners were raised. It came in the form of a young woman bearing a letter. Princess Doria Martell, daughter of Prince Nemor Martell, rode to King's Landing under a banner of truce. She brought with her a grim token, the skull of Meraxes, the fallen dragon, polished and massive. It was a gesture of defiance, remembrance, and perhaps closure. But the true weight she carried lay within her hands, a simple letter. No herald read its words aloud, no maester transcribed its contents. The letter passed from the hands of the princess into those of the Dragon Lord himself. And Aegon read it, alone. Witnesses say his expression changed with each line, his jaw tightening, his eyes darkening. By the end, his grip had become so fierce that the parchment cut into his flesh. Blood dotted the paper. He said nothing. Only stood, crossed the chamber, and cast the letter into the flames. What was written there, none can say. The contents were never shared. The treaty that followed was unprecedented in its simplicity. Dorne would remain free, its independence recognized by the Iron Throne. No swords were exchanged, no lands annexed, no hostages taken. The war was simply over. Rumors bloomed like wildfire. Some whispered that the letter contained a threat, that Rhaenys still lived, a captive in the deep vaults beneath Sunspear, and her safety was the price of peace. Others claimed the missive revealed a secret so dark, so monstrous, that Aegon dared not provoke the wrath of House Martell further. Perhaps the letter reminded him of something even the conqueror had forgotten. Not all victories are won by fire. But whatever truth lay inked on that parchment, it moved a man who had reshaped the world. It halted his ambition at the borders of the Red Mountains, and more remarkably, it sparked one of the rare moments of diplomacy in a reign marked by destruction. In the years that followed, Aegon himself would journey to Sunspear. There, in the halls of his former enemies, he stood beside Prince Nymor and confirmed the peace not with swords, but with words. The two rulers, once adversaries, shared quiet understanding. Whatever passed between them was never recorded, but their accord endured. Dorne remained independent for generations. Its stubborn sovereignty was honored by the very Iron Throne that had tried to crush it. And when the day finally came for Dorne to join the Seven Kingdoms, it was not through conquest, but through marriage, through bloodlines entwined, not spilled. Yet the mystery lingers. That letter, the one that bled in Aegon's hand and burned in his fire, still haunts the chronicles of Westeros. Was it a threat, a plea, a secret? Or was it something altogether more dangerous? A truth? No one can say. But in a land where dragons once ruled the skies and kings fell like wheat before the scythe, it was a piece of parchment that brought the most enduring peace of all. And perhaps that is the greatest riddle Westeros has ever known. As we embark on a journey through the vast and intricate tapestry of Westeros' history and mythology, few tales stir the imagination quite like the legend of Azor Ahai and the prophecy of the prince that was promised. Westeros is a land steeped deeply in political intrigue, power struggles, and brutal wars. Yet beyond the clashing armies and tangled alliances lie stories of a far more mystical and profound nature. Stories of ancient heroes, divine destinies, and battles against forces darker than mere mortal men. Among these is the legend of Azor Ahai, a mythical figure whose name echoes through the ages, shaping entire religions and the very beliefs of people across the realm. This is the tale of a hero who wielded a sword of extraordinary power known as Lightbringer, and the prophecy that foretells his inevitable return to save the world from a darkness that threatens to consume it once more. Long ago, in the shadowy age known as the Long Night, the world was plunged into a terrifying darkness. During this time, the White Walkers, sinister beings of ice and death, rose from the farthest reaches of the north, threatening to annihilate all life in Westeros. It was in this bleakest of eras that a great hero emerged to confront this encroaching evil. This hero, Azor Ahai, was no ordinary warrior. According to legend, he was chosen by the gods themselves, destined to lead mankind's resistance against the forces of darkness. His weapon was no mere blade, it was Lightbringer, a sword forged with magical power that could pierce the heart of night itself. The story behind the forging of Lightbringer is both tragic and deeply moving, among the most profound in all Westerosi lore. Azor Ahai's journey to create this legendary weapon was marked by failure and sacrifice. He attempted to forge the sword 3 times. The first time, he tempered the blade in water, hoping to strengthen it, but the sword shattered into pieces, unable to withstand the trial. Undeterred, Azor Ahai tried again, this time tempering the blade in the heart of a lion. Yet the sword broke once more, proving that sheer force and bravery were not enough. It was the 3rd attempt that truly sealed his place in history, and it required a sacrifice so great that it would forever haunt the legend. Azor Ahai realized that only a profound personal sacrifice could unlock the full power of the blade. With a heavy heart and unwavering resolve, he called upon his beloved wife, Nissa. In an act of both love and sorrow, he drove Lightbringer into her heart. As her blood flowed over the blade, a magical fire was unleashed, and the sword burned with a blinding light that could cut through the deepest shadows. This sacrifice transformed Lightbringer into a weapon capable of combating the darkness itself. Armed with this blade, Azor Ahai led the fight against the White Walkers and ultimately saved the world from eternal night. Yet the story of Azor Ahai did not end there. According to prophecy, the hero would not remain confined to the past. Instead, he was destined to be reborn as the prince that was promised, a savior who would rise again when Westeros faced the looming threat of darkness once more. This prophecy is closely entwined with the faith of Arlor, the Lord of Light, whose followers believe that the prince will lead the final battle against the White Walkers' inevitable return. Over generations, this prophecy has persisted, a beacon of hope and fear woven deeply into the culture of Westeros. As the events of A Song of Ice and Fire unfold, the ancient prophecy reemerges, influencing the choices and beliefs of many key figures across the realm. At its heart lies a pressing question: who among the living will be the reincarnation of Azor Ahai, the hero destined to save the world? Many names have been whispered as possible candidates for this legendary role, and as the story evolves, the speculation shifts between them. For a time, Stannis Baratheon, the stern and ambitious lord, was widely believed to be the prince that was promised. This conviction was largely driven by Melisandre, a priestess of Arlor, whose visions and fiery prophecies pointed to Stannis as the chosen one. Her unwavering faith in this belief guided her every action, shaping her decisions during the fierce and tumultuous war for the Iron Throne. Her controversial choices, fueled by her conviction that Stannis was Azor Ahai reborn, would have consequences reaching far beyond the battlefield. The legend of Azor Ahai, Lightbringer, and the prince that was promised is more than just a story of ancient heroes and magical swords. It is a living myth, woven into the very fabric of Westeros, shaping the hopes, fears, and destinies of those who walk its lands today. As the shadow of the White Walkers grows once more, the echoes of this prophecy will continue to guide, haunt, and inspire those who dare to believe in a savior risen from the flames. However, as the story unfolds and the threads of destiny weave ever tighter, Doubts begin to cast long shadows over the certainty of Stannis Baratheon's claim as the true prince that was promised. Melisandre, the fiery priestess whose faith once burned unwaveringly, finds her conviction shaken by the unfolding events. Her visions, once clear and resolute, now blur with uncertainty, and in the murmur of prophecy, other figures rise as possible fulfillments of this ancient legend. Among these contenders, Jon Snow emerges as a figure cloaked in mystery and significance. Born of uncertain heritage and forged by leadership in the harsh crucible of the North, Jon's resurrection from death itself adds a potent layer to the speculation. His role in the epic battle against the White Walkers, his steadfast defense of the North's people, and his embodiment of qualities often attributed to Azor Ahai: strength, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to protect, position him as a living symbol of hope and rebirth. To many, Jon Snow is not simply a man returned from death, but a potential incarnation of the legendary hero destined to wield Lightbringer and turn the tide against darkness. At the same time, across the seas and under the burning sun, Daenerys Targaryen rises as another beacon of the prophecy's promise. Known as the Mother of Dragons, Daenerys carries not only the legacy of her ancient bloodline, but also the might of 3 dragons, living embodiments of fire and destruction. Her relentless quest to reclaim the Iron Throne, to bring justice and liberation to the oppressed, resonates deeply with the prophecy's themes. Daenerys is seen by some as Azor Ahai reborn, a figure of immense power whose burning desire to reshape the world reflects the heart of the legend. Her fiery connection to fire and blood, the emblem of her house, makes her an unmistakable candidate for the prince that was promised. The religious significance of this prophecy among the followers of Arlor, the Lord of Light, cannot be overstated. For these devout believers, the return of Azor Ahai is more than just a myth or hope. It is a guiding force shaping their faith and actions. Melisandre's visions, her intricate manipulation of political and magical events, and even the resurrection of Jon Snow are deeply intertwined with her unwavering belief in this prophecy. She sees herself as the chosen instrument of the Lord of Light, destined to ensure the rebirth of Azor Ahai and the eventual triumph of light over darkness. At its core, the legend of Azor Ahai speaks to a timeless and universal theme that permeates the history of Westeros: the necessity of sacrifice for the greater good. Just as Azor Ahai sacrificed his beloved wife to forge the legendary sword Lightbringer, those who seek to fulfill the prophecy must be willing to give up everything: their love, their lives, their very souls, to save the world from encroaching darkness. This theme of sacrifice, destiny, and the heavy burden of leadership courses through the narrative veins of Game of Thrones, reminding us that the battle between light and dark is never free of cost. As the final chapters of this epic tale approach, the question of who will truly embody Azor Ahai remains unresolved. Whether it will be Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, or some unexpected figure lurking in the shadows, the legend of the prince that was promised continues to captivate hearts and minds alike. It serves as a beacon of hope amid despair, a symbol of the sacrifices that must be made to stave off the darkness threatening to consume the world. Beyond the grand tapestry of prophecy and war, the legends of Westeros unfold with stories that blur the lines between history and myth. Among the free folk, one such tale is passed down through generations, a story woven with threads of cunning, romance, and tragic fate. It is the story of Bale the Bard, a man whose exploits left an unforgettable imprint on both the noble Starks of Winterfell and the wild free folk beyond the Wall. Bale's tale is rich with deception, love, and revenge, a complex narrative that speaks to the tangled nature of fate itself. Known as a renowned raider with a sharp wit and irresistible charm, Bale's story begins not with conquest, but with a personal vendetta against Lord Brandon Stark of Winterfell. It is said that Bale was insulted by Lord Stark, a slight too great to ignore. But rather than responding with simple violence, Bale chose a more cunning path, one that would haunt the Stark family for generations to come. Disguised as a traveling singer, Bale infiltrated Winterfell under the pretense of peace and goodwill. His music and clever words won the favor of Lord Brandon Stark himself. When asked what reward he desired for his performance, Bale requested the most beautiful flower in Winterfell's gardens. Unaware of the deeper meaning behind this request, Lord Stark presented him with a rare blue winter rose, a symbol of northern beauty and, unbeknownst to him, a harbinger of the tragedy to come. The very next morning, Winterfell awoke to horror and confusion. Lord Stark's only daughter had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the solitary blue rose. The desperate search that followed uncovered no clues, plunging the Stark family into deep sorrow. With no sign of their beloved daughter, the Stark lineage faced the terrifying possibility of fading into extinction. The strength and stability of Winterfell seemed shattered by the actions of a single cunning adversary. Yet, beneath Winterfell itself, hidden from the eyes of all, Bale and the Stark Maiden lived in secret. For years, they remained concealed within the ancient crypts, a place steeped in mystery and guarded by old laws. Over time, their legend grew in whispers and shadow, but when they finally emerged, they did so not alone, but with a child. A son born of both Stark blood and the wild free folk. This child, unknown to many, would one day rise to become the next Lord of Winterfell, restoring the house that Bale's scheme had almost destroyed. As with many Westerosi tales, however, the story of Bale the Bard does not conclude with peace and happiness. Time passed, the child grew into a man and took his rightful place as Lord Stark. Bale returned to his life beyond the wall, leading the free folk once more. But fate, ever cruel and unpredictable, had one final twist waiting in the wings. A battle between the free folk and the Starks that would test loyalties, lives, and legacies alike. The son of Bale, now fully grown but unaware of the true identity of his parent, found himself face to face with his father on a battlefield soaked in the blood and chaos of war. In that tragic moment, the son, completely oblivious to the profound bond that tied them, struck a fatal blow against Bale. With the severed head of his father held high, he returned to Winterfell, a grim trophy signifying victory and conquest. It was only when the mother of Bale's son laid eyes on the grisly prize that the painful truth was revealed. Her son had unwittingly slain his own father. This devastating realization crushed her spirit. Overwhelmed by grief too immense to bear, she took her own life, consumed by the weight of her loss. Thus, a tragic cycle of love, revenge, and sorrow came full circle, leaving behind a legacy of pain and heartbreak. Among the free folk, Bale the Bard stands as a towering figure, remembered not just as a great raider, but as a legendary hero whose cunning and skill shaped the course of history. His tale, while marked by tragedy, serves as a powerful reminder that even the mightiest houses of Westeros are vulnerable to the actions of one determined individual. But Bale's story is more than just one of warfare and conquest. It is a narrative steeped in love and loss, where fate cruelly twists the most carefully laid plans into moments of irreversible tragedy. His legend exposes the deep cultural rifts separating the free folk from the noble houses of Westeros. For the free folk, freedom, cleverness, and personal strength are paramount. In contrast, the noble houses are bound by ancient traditions, unyielding duties, and a strict code of family honor. Bale's daring infiltration of Winterfell and the near destruction of the Stark line stand as a stark reminder of the unpredictable and often brutal nature of those who live beyond the wall. To the noble houses, Bale's actions were seen as a grave violation, a stain on the peace they sought to maintain. Yet, for the free folk, it was a brilliant triumph of wit and determination over raw power. Bale's story echoes deeply within the broader narrative of Westeros. Much like Jon Snow, a man caught between two worlds, Bale navigated a complex relationship between loyalty and love, honor and desire. Jon's love for Ygritte, a wildling woman, and his divided allegiance between the Night's Watch and the free folk mirror the tensions that shaped Bale's life and choices. Both men found themselves ensnared in the painful struggle between duty and the yearnings of the heart, trapped in a world where love and loyalty often clashed with harsh reality. Bale the Bard's legend, though born from shadow and conflict, is a vivid reminder of the intricate web of fate that binds the people of Westeros. It is a story of revenge so fierce it almost extinguished a great house, of love that transcended the boundaries of culture and bloodline, and of the tragic consequences when history refuses to release its hold. Westeros' history is rich with tales of kings and queens, fierce battles and shifting alliances, but sometimes the most enduring stories are those that reveal the tender human experiences beneath the surface. One such story is that of Jenny of Oldstones, a common girl whose love and tragedy left a profound mark on the realm's history. Unlike the epic wars and power struggles that dominate the chronicles, Jenny's tale reminds us that love, even in a world ruled by duty and ambition, can be the most powerful force, though sometimes it leads only to heartbreak. Jenny of Oldstones was born far from the grandeur of castles and crowns, a simple girl from the Riverlands living in a forgotten corner of Westeros. Yet fate had woven her destiny tightly with the royal blood of the Targaryens. In the quiet, pastoral spaces of her world, she met Prince Duncan Targaryen, heir to the Iron Throne. Duncan, known for his adventurous spirit and charm, fell deeply in love with Jenny, and their bond defied the rigid expectations of the royal court. Unlike many arranged matches forged for power and alliances, Duncan's affection for Jenny was genuine and profound. He loved her so much that he was willing to give up everything, including his claim to the Iron Throne. At the time, Duncan was engaged to a daughter of House Baratheon, a politically strategic union arranged by his father, King Aegon Fuft, to strengthen the Targaryen hold on the realm. But in an act that shocked the kingdom, Duncan broke off his engagement and married Jenny purely for love, casting aside duty and ambition alike. King Aegon Fuft, despite his reformist ideals and vision for a stronger unified realm, could not accept his son's defiance. He saw Duncan's marriage to a commoner as a threat to the legacy of House Targaryen and attempted to annul the union. Yet Duncan stood firm, placing love above throne and tradition. This bold decision rippled through the realm, altering the Targaryen line of succession and setting the stage for the complex future that would unfold. Jenny's influence extended beyond her relationship with Duncan. She was a close companion of the Ghost of High Heart, a mysterious woods witch whose prophetic visions were respected even by the Targaryens. The ghost's foresight was profound, and one of her most significant prophecies concerned the fate of the realm itself. She foretold that the union of Prince Aerys and Princess Rhaella, Duncan's younger brother and sister, would bring forth the prince that was promised, a destined savior meant to lead the fight against darkness. This prophecy deeply influenced King Aegon I's decision to marry Aerys and Rhaella, a union that would eventually produce Rhaegar Targaryen. While the prophecy promised a future of hope and salvation, it also foreshadowed the turbulent and tragic times that would befall House Targaryen. The events surrounding the prince that was promised played a pivotal role in both the downfall and eventual resurgence of the family. Through her friendship with the Ghost of High Heart, Jenny of Oldstones became intertwined with the fate of the realm in ways that went beyond her humble origins. Her life, though quiet in the grand scope of history, wove a meaningful thread in the tapestry of Targaryen legend and lore. Yet Jenny's story ends in sorrow. She is believed to have died in the devastating fire at Summerhall, one of the darkest and most mysterious tragedies in Targaryen history. The blaze destroyed the royal seat in a catastrophe that left many questions unanswered and cast a shadow over the legacy of the house she had once touched with love. In the vast and tumultuous history of Westeros, Jenny of Oldstones stands as a poignant reminder that behind the swords and thrones are stories of love and loss, sacrifice and hope. Her tale teaches us that even in a world ruled by duty and ambition, the human heart remains a powerful, unpredictable force that shapes the destiny of kingdoms. Summerhall was meant to stand as a magnificent celebration, a joyous event to mark a moment of hope and renewal for the realm. Instead, it became a night of tragedy and ruin, forever etched into the annals of Westeros as a disaster that claimed the lives of many, including the beloved King Aegon V and his son, Prince Duncan. The precise cause of the fire that consumed Summerhall remains wrapped in mystery, a dark secret that whispers through history with no clear answer. Yet, many believe the disaster was connected to Aegon's dangerous obsession, an obsession with dragons and the desperate desire to hatch new ones, a pursuit that blinded him to the perils surrounding his court and ultimately led to his downfall. Among the casualties was Jenny of Oldstones, a woman of humble birth whose love for Prince Duncan defied the rigid conventions of nobility. Their romance was a rare and beautiful anomaly in a world where alliances were forged for power, not passion. However, the flames of Summerhall did not discriminate. They consumed everything in their path, extinguishing this tender love along with the lives of those caught in the blaze. The love story of Jenny and Duncan, though vibrant and genuine, met a cruel fate, a reminder that even the purest of passions can be destroyed by forces beyond control. Jenny, once just a common girl from Oldstones, became more than a name after that night. She transformed into a haunting symbol of love's fragility in a realm dominated by politics and duty. Her story lives on in songs sung by bards and whispered around hearths, most famously in the ballad Jenny of Oldstones. This mournful melody captures the bittersweet essence of loss and longing, speaking of Jenny dancing with ghosts, an evocative image that lingers in the minds of those who hear it. The song is a poignant tribute, echoing themes of time's relentless march and the enduring shadow of love that outlasts death itself. Through the haunting lyrics, Jenny's tale remains immortal, an emotional thread woven into the vast tapestry of Westerosi history. Though Jenny was never born into privilege, her love with Prince Duncan Targaryen is remembered as one of the most touching and tragic tales in the realm. It stands as a testament to the power of love, even in a world where legacies and power struggles often overshadow matters of the heart. Their story reminds us that amidst the cold games of thrones and ruthless ambition, moments of true human connection can still shine through, if only briefly, before fading into the shadows of history. Westeros itself is a land steeped in legends and ancient relics, artifacts that carry with them the weight of forgotten times. Among these is the fabled Horn of Winter, an object shrouded in myth and mystery, said to possess immense power, the ability to bring down the wall itself and awaken the giants buried beneath the frozen earth. The horn has become a potent symbol of the forces lurking beyond the wall, forces long held at bay but threatening to rise again. The legend of the Horn of Winter dates back to the time of Joramun, a legendary king beyond the wall who united the wildlings in rebellion against the Night's Watch and the Lords of Westeros. It is said that Joramun blew the horn to summon giants from the earth, colossal beings who aided him in his battles against his enemies. But the horn's power was not limited to summoning ancient creatures. It was believed capable of destroying the wall itself, the monumental barrier built by Bran the Builder to protect the realms of men from the dangers of the far north. For centuries, the Horn of Winter has been woven into wildling lore, passed down through generations in songs and tales shared around campfires in the icy wilderness beyond the wall. To the free folk, the horn is a symbol of hope and defiance, a reminder that the wall, though seemingly impregnable, is not eternal. Whoever controls the horn wields the power to bring the Great Wall crumbling down, breaking the barrier that has long kept the North isolated from the lands beyond. During the events of A Song of Ice and Fire, this ancient legend moves from mere story to a tangible mystery. When Samwell Tarly, a member of the Night's Watch, discovers a weathered horn buried near dragonglass weapons at the Fist of the First Men, a remote and ancient site north of the wall, it sparks renewed excitement and speculation. Could this artifact be the legendary Horn of Winter, the key to unleashing its fabled power? Despite the fervor, the true nature and power of the horn remain unproven, its secrets locked away with the past. Meanwhile, Mance Rayder, the current king beyond the wall and leader of the Free Folk, claims to possess the horn himself. He wields it as a weapon in a deadly game of negotiation, threatening to blow the horn and bring down the wall unless the Night's Watch grants safe passage for his people. This tense moment brings the legend to the forefront of Westeros' fate, with the entire realm hanging in the balance. Mance's threat is clear and chilling. Open the gates, or face the destruction of a structure that has stood for thousands of years. Yet, in the end, the horn Mance brandishes is revealed to be a fake. Though imposing in size and appearance, it lacks the ancient power the legends ascribe to it. His deception, while effective in stirring fear and uncertainty among the Night's Watch, proves ultimately to be a bluff, an act of desperation rather than true force. Thus, the Horn of Winter remains a potent symbol, a relic of power wrapped in mystery and legend, a reminder that in the world of Westeros, stories of love, loss, and power are forever intertwined, each casting long shadows across the frozen north and the kingdoms of men. The true Horn of Winter, if it exists at all, remains an elusive enigma. its location hidden deep within the untamed wilderness of the far north, and its immense power shrouded in mystery. The wall, standing tall and cold, is far more than a mere physical barricade separating the free folk from the rest of Westeros. It is a symbolic threshold, a line drawn between the known and the unknown, a boundary marking the edge of civilization and the beginning of wild, uncharted lands beyond. For the people of the North and the sworn brothers of the Night's Watch, the wall is a beacon of protection, a steadfast line meant to keep the ancient, creeping dangers lurking in the darkness at bay. But to the free folk, those who roam the lands north of the wall, it is a prison, a stark divider that confines their people to the harsh, frozen wastes they call home. The Horn of Winter, whispered about in old legends, carries a power far greater than most can imagine, the ability to bring down the wall itself. Its significance is not just in the destruction it could cause, but in what the collapse of the wall would mean for the world. To see the wall fall is to witness the shattering of boundaries between realms, a rupture that would unleash ancient, uncontrollable forces long held in check by that colossal barrier. This wall stands as a monument to humanity's struggle against the wild forces of nature, magic, and the unknown. It embodies the determination to hold back darkness, to control what cannot be tamed. The Horn of Winter, if it is real, represents the undoing of all those efforts, the catalyst that could unravel the fragile order maintained for centuries. Yet its true nature remains one of Westeros's deepest mysteries. The power it holds might be far more dangerous and transformative than anyone dares to believe, especially as the threat of the White Walkers grows closer and tensions between the free folk and the realms of men escalate. For generations, the wall was seen as impenetrable, an unyielding fortress. But legends persist, old tales told in hushed tones saying that when the Horn of Winter sounds, the wall will fall. Whether that day will ever arrive remains uncertain. Still, the stories of Joramun, the ancient figure said to have wielded the horn, continue to haunt those living in the wall's shadow, a chilling reminder that the edges of their world are far more fragile than they seem. Westeros is a land of great castles, some famed for their strength alone. Harrenhal, for example, once mighty and towering, succumbed to the devastating fury of dragonfire, crumbling into ruins. But there is another fortress, one unlike any other, whose endurance is not merely due to stone and mortar, but is woven deeply with ancient magic. Storm's End stands as a testament not only to physical might, but to the mystical forces that protect it, a place where the boundary between mortal and supernatural blurs. Storm's End is far more than just a castle. It is a monument to defiance and resilience, built to withstand the wrath of gods themselves. Its story begins with Durin Godsgrief, the first Storm King, whose tragic love for the goddess Elon set the stage for a conflict not only between men, but between mortals and divine powers. Legend holds that Durin fell deeply in love with Elon, the daughter of the sea god and the wind goddess. Their union was a bold challenge to the will of the gods, and in fury, the divine forces unleashed relentless storms to destroy every fortress Durin raised. No matter how grand the castle, it was torn down again and again, reduced to rubble by the storm's wrath. But Durin was not a man to surrender easily. With unwavering determination, he began the construction of one final fortress, Storm's End. This castle, he vowed, would stand firm against the fury of both sea and sky, a living symbol of his love and defiance. Though his own human strength could not withstand the god's power alone, legend tells of magical assistance granted to him. Some say it was the children of the forest, ancient mystical beings who roamed the lands before men. Others believe Bran the Builder, the legendary architect who is said to have constructed the wall, lent his knowledge and skill to Durin's cause. Regardless of the source, the result was undeniable. Storm's End, a fortress whose walls could not be broken, no matter how fierce the storm. The magic protecting Storm's End is as much a part of its identity as the towering stone battlements themselves. The very stones are said to be imbued with powerful enchantments, shielding the fortress from not only the fury of nature but from any supernatural assault. Throughout history, this magical protection has played a critical role. During Robert's Rebellion, Stannis Baratheon, Robert's younger brother, held Storm's End against a prolonged siege by the forces of the Reach. Cut off from supplies and starved, the defenders should have succumbed, yet the fortress itself remained unyielding. Not even the vast armies of the Reach could breach its walls. It was only through the clever smuggling efforts of Davos Seaworth, later known as the Onion Knight, that food was brought inside, allowing Stannis and his men to endure. The same magic that defends Storm's End from storms also shields it from the crushing weight of siege warfare. Another striking moment came during the War of the Five Kings, when the Red Priestess Melisandre sought to influence the war's outcome with her dark blood magic. Though she wielded significant power as a follower of the Lord of Light, Melisandre was unable to enter Storm's End herself. The castle's magical defenses barred her passage, forcing her to resort to darker means, birthing a shadow assassin, a creature born of darkness and sorcery, which slipped past the magical barriers and assassinated Renly Baratheon, Stannis' younger brother and rival claimant to the throne. Melisandre's inability to breach the castle herself reveals the formidable ancient power woven into Storm's End's walls. This combination of physical strength and mystical protection makes Storm's End unique among Westeros' great castles. While others rely solely on stone and steel, Storm's End is guarded by unseen forces, a place where human ingenuity meets supernatural power. It is a fortress where the wrath of gods was met with the unyielding will of men, and where both elements left an indelible mark on the stones that endure to this day. The legacy of Storm's End extends beyond architecture. It stands as a symbol of defiance. Durin Godsgrief's rebellion against the gods and the Baratheon family's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. The Baratheons, ruling from this fortress for centuries, carry this weighty history with them. For Stannis Baratheon, Storm's End was not just a home, it was a constant reminder of his family's strength, their ability to withstand and endure. Though the castle silently witnesses the passing of time, the magic woven into its stones continues to shape the fate of all who seek to command it. Storm's End has withstood every trial thrown at it, never once yielding to the relentless fury of storms, nor succumbing to the dark arts of sorcery. Its walls, both tangible and enchanted, stand unbreached, a powerful symbol of resilience forged in an age when the castle was designed to defy even the gods. Through the shifting tides of Westeros, as kingdoms rise and fall and new threats creep from the shadows, the question hangs heavy in the air. Will Storm's End remain steadfast, its ancient magic holding the encroaching darkness at bay? Or will there come a day when a force more formidable than any before finally shatters its defenses? Westeros is a land woven with stories, tales of mighty rulers who shaped history, tragic romances that tug at the heart, and betrayals so profound they echo through the ages. Yet among these legends, few cast a shadow as haunting and mysterious as that of the Night's King. His tale is enmeshed in ancient laws and old magics, chilling enough to unsettle even the bravest. Once a revered leader of the Night's Watch, his story unfolds as a dark saga of forbidden love and sinister sorcery, unleashing a chain of events that threatened not just the Wall, but the entire realm. Though his name was scrubbed from the records and his legacy wiped clean, whispers of the Night's King still haunt the icy winds beyond the Wall. His story serves as a grim reminder of the perils lurking in the frozen wilderness beyond the reach of men. The story begins with the Night's King himself, the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. He was a man of strength and charisma, chosen to lead those sworn to stand sentinel against the terrors beyond the Wall. His duty was clear: protect the realms of men from the savage dangers hidden in the frozen north. But even the noblest of men can be led astray by power. During his command, the Night's King encountered a mysterious woman whose skin was said to be as cold as ice. Some whispered she was a White Walker, one of the ancient and terrifying others, supernatural beings tied to dark, forgotten magics. Others believed she was something darker, more elusive and terrible still. Enraptured by her, the Night's King brought her back to the Night Fort, one of the oldest and most formidable castles along the Wall. But this union was far from ordinary. Instead of forging an alliance that would strengthen his leadership and honor his vows, the Night's King declared himself not only Lord Commander, but to King, crowning his enigmatic bride Queen. From the shadowed halls of the Night Fort, they ruled not as protectors, but as tyrants. Their reign was marked by cruelty and dark sorcery. The Night's King enslaved his own brothers of the Night's Watch, bending them to his will through unholy magic. Atrocities were committed that sent ripples of terror across the land. Their rule was unnatural, steeped in evil. The Night's King fed on fear, his dark powers growing stronger with every life shattered in defiance. The Night Fort itself, already cloaked in eerie and ancient history, became the epicenter of their reign of terror. Legends say the very stones of the castle were soaked with the magic of the others, infused with malevolent power. The Night's King sought not merely to hold the wall as a defense, but to transform it into a gateway, opening a dark path for horrors beyond to flood the world. But all who delve too deeply into darkness eventually face reckoning. It was Brandon, the Breaker King of the North, who recognized the deadly threat posed by the Night's King. Knowing that ordinary strength alone would not suffice, Brandon sought the aid of Joramun, the King Beyond the Wall, leader of the wild free folk. This rare and unlikely alliance between the noble houses of the North and the untamed wildlings underscored the severity of the menace. Together, these two kings led a fierce and desperate campaign against the Night's King and his Dark Queen. The battle was brutal and relentless, a clash of forces both mortal and supernatural. In the end, the Night's King was slain, his reign of terror shattered, and the dark magic that sustained him broken. Yet the true horror of his legacy was so shameful and dangerous that it was erased from the histories of Westeros. His name was wiped clean from all records, leaving only whispers, rumors, and fragmented legends to haunt the memories of those who dwell near the wall. The Night's King became a shadowy figure, a ghost in the icy wind, forever a warning of the dark powers that lie just beyond the edge of the known world. The figure known as the Night's King stands as a haunting symbol etched deep into the ancient lore of Westeros, a warning cast across the ages to those who serve in the Night's Watch, a grim reminder of the catastrophic consequences when power is twisted and corrupted by dark, unfathomable forces. Though the name of the Night's King has faded from the pages of history, swallowed by time and myth, the mystery surrounding his true identity continues to ignite endless speculation and debate among scholars, historians, and those fascinated by the shadowy past of the North. Some hold the belief that this enigmatic ruler may have once been a Stark, perhaps someone named Brandon, a man of the ancient First Men, those early settlers who once ruled the vast northern reaches of Westeros. Others propose an alternative theory, suggesting that he was one of the earliest members of the Night's Watch itself. A brother who, like many before and after him, was irresistibly drawn into the perilous and arcane secrets lurking beyond the wall. His connection to the supernatural forces known as the White Walkers and their monstrous lieutenants, the Others, only serves to deepen the enigma, blurring the boundaries between human and beast, hero and villain, mortal and myth. In the sprawling saga of Game of Thrones, this ancient figure finds a chilling reflection in the character of the Night King, the fearsome leader of the White Walkers, and a terrifying embodiment of death and the endless winter that threatens to consume the realm. While the Night King of the television series is not a direct retelling of the Night's King from the original books, the show's portrayal draws heavily from the same haunting themes: betrayal, forbidden love, and the seductive allure of power, wielded by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Both men serve as living testaments to a grim truth. The Wall, while erected as a bastion of protection against the terrors from the north, is also a place where darkness festers, and where the fragile line separating humanity from the supernatural can easily dissolve. The story of the Night's King stands as a stark cautionary tale, a reminder that the Wall is far more than a mere physical barricade. It is a fragile boundary, a liminal space between order and chaos, between the realm of the living and the domain of the dead. Though his name has been lost to time and his deeds erased from official history, the echoes of his existence still resonate across the frozen wilderness beyond the Wall. A chilling reminder that some dark forces are neither easily vanquished nor forgotten. Throughout Westeros, whispers of the old gods are woven into the land itself, their presence more subtle and enduring than the organized and visible worship of the Faith of the Seven, with its grand septs and high septon. The old gods are not just deities, they are the ancient spirits of the forests and the land, their influence rooted deep in the history and soul of the continent. Their watchful gaze is embodied by the towering weirwood trees, their white bark and blood-red leaves standing as silent sentinels to countless prayers, oaths, and secrets whispered beneath their shadowed branches. The Old God's dominion stretches back thousands of years to the earliest days of the First Men, the people who migrated from Essos to Westeros. Their arrival sparked fierce conflict with the native children of the forest, guardians of the land's primordial magic, who fiercely protected their sacred groves of weirwoods. The First Men, initially unaware of the deeper mystical power woven into these trees and the land itself, waged brutal war, cutting down countless weirwoods in their quest for control. But eventually, both sides came to recognize an unbreakable bond connecting them to the Old Gods. After years of bloodshed and hardship, a fragile peace was forged, the Pact, a sacred agreement that ended hostilities and united the First Men and the children of the forest in shared reverence for the Old Gods. From that pivotal moment, the First Men embraced the worship of the Old Gods, weaving their ancient power into the very fabric of their culture and beliefs. Their descendants, especially those living in the north, continue to honor these ancient deities to this day. The weirwood trees, with their distinctive carved faces and crimson sap, are far more than mere symbols. They are believed to be the vigilant eyes of the Old Gods, watching over the world with quiet, unwavering vigilance. The sacred groves known as Godswoods, where these trees flourish, are places of serene reflection and prayer. Here, in the hushed stillness beneath the blood-red leaves, the faithful seek guidance, listening intently for the whispered voice of the Old Gods carried on the rustling wind. These trees have stood for countless generations, enduring centuries of war, peace, and change. Through them, the Old Gods remain ever watchful, their presence a constant in a world that is always shifting and uncertain. The bond between the Old Gods and their followers extends beyond simple worship. Among their most revered servants are the Green Seers, individuals gifted with the extraordinary ability to see through the eyes of the weirwoods. These mystics possess visions of the past, present, and future, glimpsing truths that are hidden to ordinary men. One of the most significant Green Seers in the saga is Bran Stark, whose journey to master this ancient and mysterious power becomes a cornerstone of the story. Through his training and discovery, Bran learns to navigate the complex web of visions and memories granted by the Old Gods, communicating with them in ways that most can only dream of. His connection to the weirwoods and the Old Gods bridges the gap between the mortal realm and the timeless forces that shape the fate of Westeros. In this tapestry of history, magic, and legend, the tales of the Night's King and the Old Gods intertwine to reveal a world where the past is never truly gone, and where the shadows of ancient powers continue to influence the destiny of all who live beneath the ever-watchful trees. Green Seers, like Bran Stark, serve as living bridges to an ancient and mystical realm, connecting directly to the powerful Old Gods of Westeros. These beings draw upon the deep and hidden knowledge stored within the weirwood trees, those ancient, towering sentinels whose white bark and blood-red leaves pulse with a magic that predates human memory. The weirwoods are more than trees. They are living repositories of history, magic, and spiritual energy, anchoring the Old God's presence in the world. Beyond the Green Seers, there exist the Skin Changers, individuals gifted with the uncanny ability to enter the minds of animals and bend their will to their own. This rare and mysterious power is also thought to stem from the Old Gods, symbolizing the profound and unbreakable bond between nature and magic that underpins their worship. Skin Changers like Jon Snow through his direwolf ghost, and Bran Stark through his connection with Summer, reveal how the influence of the Old Gods extends far beyond human realms. It touches the wild creatures of Westeros, linking the fates of man and beast in an intricate dance woven by ancient forces. The faith in the Old Gods stands in striking contrast to the structured and hierarchical faith of the Seven, which dominates the southern kingdoms. While the faith of the Seven is marked by its formal churches called septs, its clergy including septons, and a well-defined doctrine, the worship of the Old Gods is decentralized, intimate, and deeply personal. There are no grand ceremonies, no written scriptures, no rigid rituals. Instead, followers of the old gods seek a direct, silent communion with the divine, often in quiet solitude beneath the branches of the weirwoods, whispering prayers for guidance and protection. This form of worship, humble and unassuming, has endured especially in the north, where houses like the Starks continue to honor the old gods as part of their identity and heritage. The faith is interwoven into the very culture of the north, handed down through generations like a living memory. For the free folk or wildlings who dwell beyond the wall, the old gods represent something even more primal and essential. Living in the untamed wilderness, their connection to the gods is not limited to trees, but extends to the wind, the waters, the skies, and the earth beneath their feet. Their faith is a raw, elemental bond to the land itself, one forged by survival and the fierce rhythms of nature. This ancient worship ties the free folk to the magic that has never truly left Westeros, even as kingdoms rise and fall. The old gods symbolize the deep, enduring magic of the natural world, a stark contrast to the scheming and political maneuvering for control of the Iron Throne. They serve as a reminder that the cycles of nature, birth, death, growth, and decay, continue unaltered by the ambitions of mortals. This quiet but potent influence manifests in moments of great importance, whether in Bran's transformation into a green seer, Jon Snow's profound bond with Ghost, or the solemn prayers whispered beneath the weirwood canopy at Winterfell. Even in a realm dominated by power struggles, war, and conquest, the old gods endure. They are the silent watchers, the unseen presences in the weirwoods, whose ancient magic continues to pulse beneath the surface of the land. Their power waits patiently for the right moment to rise again, a constant reminder of the mysterious forces embedded in the roots of the world. In an uncertain world where so much is fleeting and fragile, the old gods stand as timeless guardians of secrets yet to be uncovered. Not all stories told of the Night's Watch speak of honor and bravery. Some legends are darker, serving as warnings about the terrible cost of breaking the sacred vows sworn at the Wall. These cautionary tales remind us that the old gods' power is not only a source of guidance, but also a force of judgment and consequence, underscoring the delicate balance between human will and the ancient laws that govern the land. One of the most haunting and somber stories woven into the extensive history of the Night's Watch is that of the 79 Sentinels. Their tale stands as a chilling reminder of the brutal price exacted for desertion, an unforgivable betrayal in the eyes of the Watch. This story is not merely one of punishment, it is a profound narrative steeped in duty, honor, and the relentless consequences of breaking the sacred vows that bind every brother of the Night's Watch for life. The tale begins with an act considered among the most egregious crimes a brother could commit: desertion. These 79 men, who once pledged their lives to the protection of the realm, abandoned their posts along the wall. For reasons now lost to time, they fled from the cold and deadly watchtower, seeking refuge and escape from the unforgiving duty they swore to uphold. Their desperation drove them to Lord Rel, a noble kin, hoping that the bonds of family would shield them from the merciless justice the Watch is known for. But they gravely misjudged the unbreakable power of the oaths they took and the stern code of honor that dictated their fate. Lord Rel found himself torn between two impossible loyalties: his family and his duty to the realm. Even more agonizing was the fact that among the deserters was his own son. In Westeros, the demands of honor often outweigh the ties of blood, and Rel's story is a stark example of this harsh reality. Harboring traitors, even family, threatened not only his name but also the fragile safety of the entire realm. In a heartbreaking yet resolute decision, he chose the greater good over personal attachment. He turned his son and all 78 other deserters back to the Wall, sending them to face the merciless justice of the Night's Watch. Upon their return, the deserters were presented before the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. At this time in history, the laws governing the Watch were as cold and unyielding as the relentless winds that swept the Wall itself. Desertion was punishable by death, and the Lord Commander had no option but to uphold this grim law. Yet, rather than a swift execution, the commander devised a punishment that would echo through the ages, a lasting and horrifying symbol meant to deter any who might contemplate betrayal. The 79 sentinels were not merely executed. They were condemned to a fate worse than death. Their bodies were sealed within the very ice of the wall, their frozen forms facing northwards, eternally staring into the frozen wilderness they once pledged to defend. In life, they had turned their backs on their sacred duty. In death, their watch continued, an eternal and frozen vigil. This decree from the Lord Commander became a chilling refrain repeated through Westeros. They left their posts in life, so in death their watch goes on forever. For the men who remained faithful, this punishment was more than a sentence. It was a stark warning. Taking the black was no light matter. It was a vow of lifelong service, binding a man to an unbreakable duty. The wall was the fragile barrier between the world of men and the untamed, deadly forces of the far north. Weakness, disloyalty, and fear could not be tolerated. The frozen forms of the 79 sentinels embedded in the wall became a living monument to the cost of failure, a gruesome, icy reminder that betrayal would be met with eternal punishment. This haunting legend was recounted by Stark during his perilous journey beyond the wall. As Bran and his companions ventured deeper into the frozen wasteland, Stark shared the story of the 79 sentinels with Jojen Reed. For Bran, the tale was more than a ghost story. It was a reflection of the unyielding discipline demanded of every brother in the Night's Watch. It was a lesson in honor and sacrifice, a reminder of the harsh realities faced by those who swore their lives to protect the realm. Raised amidst the ancient traditions of the North and steeped in the long, often painful legacy of his family's ties to the Watch, Bran understood the deeper significance of the Sentinel's story. It was a stark reminder of the price of duty, a price paid time and again by countless men who relinquished their homes, titles, and families for the sake of a cause greater than themselves. For these men, the cost of desertion was not merely death. It was the complete and irrevocable loss of honor. And in a brotherhood bound by unbreakable oaths, losing honor was a fate far worse than death. The legacy of the 79 Sentinels endures within the Night's Watch as a powerful symbol of duty and the grave consequences of betrayal. Their eternal vigil, frozen in the ice of the wall, stands as a relentless warning to all who take the black. Desertion is not simply a betrayal of brothers, but a betrayal of the entire realm. The wall is more than a towering barricade of stone and ice. It is a monument to sacrifice, loyalty, and unwavering honor. In the bleak and unforgiving world of the Night's Watch, where life is harsh and the stakes are unbearably high, the story of the 79 Sentinels is passed down from one brother to another. It is a tale meant to instill fear, but also to underscore the solemn gravity of the vows sworn at the wall. For those who take the black, there is no turning back, no chance to escape the burden of duty. The wall becomes their home, their life, and if necessary, their final resting place, an eternal testament to the sacrifices demanded by the Watch and the unbreakable oaths sworn in its name.